following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op, in affiliation with the network at bicbp-radio.com.
Question: who is lying to you today? The media? Social media? Big business? Politicians? Actually, it's probably all of them. That led me to create this podcast named They're All Lying to Us. We do research and present findings and opinions on political, social, and cultural topics to inform our communities about what's really going on. You know, stuff that affects everyday American life. We also invite you to share your voice and help us recreate real-life interactions as they were had in the pre-digital era. I'm your host for these conversations. My name is Andy. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of They Are All Lying to Us. Just as a background to our site, you can find our website at www.lyingtous.com, where you can find more of our blogs and some of our earlier podcasts. You can also find our podcasts over on the Apple Podcast site and on Spotify. And without that, I'll head into today's topic on June 19th, 2024. So today what I decided to talk about is entitled What Euro Soccer Teaches Us About Nationalism, Racism, and Human Nature. Now, in case you weren't aware, the 2024 UEFA European Championships are being hosted in Germany, and they started just a few days ago, and it's poised to be a spectacle of soccer, also known as football in Europe, a prowess and competition. It would seem to be no coincidence that the countries with the best of odds of winning are among the largest and wealthiest countries with the best professional leagues. I'm talking about France, England, Germany, and Spain. And amidst all the excitement on the pitch, as they say, and in the stadiums, international soccer tournaments often shed light on deeper issues of nationalism, racism, and the intrinsic nature of human group dynamics. Now, while fans can dive in now and enjoy some of the world's best soccer, or if you have no interest in the sport at all, today we're going to take a look at some of the broader societal lessons of Euro football. From pride to prejudice, the psychology of Euro football. From a purely functional perspective, any sporting event can be a great source of entertainment for fans, and major sporting tournaments can stimulate significant amounts of economic activity. In the case of Euro 2024, UEFA itself is estimated to generate $2.7 billion in revenues from the month-long event. Fans from all over the continent and beyond will travel to the games. Now, psychologically, there's something called social identity theory, which posits that group membership provides us with a sense of belonging and raises self-esteem. We humans tend to categorize people in terms of group memberships, dividing the world into us versus them. We often favor individuals belonging to our same social group and discriminate against those in the out group. In the more specific case of European football, research has found that there's strong evidence of in-group favoritism based on national identity. Now, the psychological motive behind sports fandom may be derived from the human need for social identity and belonging to the in-group. Supporting a team provides a sense of community, and individuals can feel connected to something larger than themselves. Often escape from daily stress, being a sports fan can not only boost your self-esteem, but also make you happier. And that was according to an article I read on NBC News. Now, on the flip side, the outgroup part of social identity theory may explain some of the negative events that took place after the Euro 2020 final. Now, the Euro 2020 was actually delayed by COVID to 2021, and the tournament was based in England and was won by Italy, yay Italy, in penalty kicks following a beautifully played final. The aftermath, however, was not so pretty in many respects. Skirmishes between Italian and English fans were reported on the streets of London. Social media videos appeared with headlines like "Violent English fans attack, racially abuse Italians." English fans even turned on some of their own players, taking to social media to criticize three black English footballers, Bukayo Saka, Marcus Rashford, and Jadon Sancho, who missed penalty kicks in the final. The ugly posts included the use of monkey emojis and racist language such as, the N-word. Now, such outbursts are unfortunately not all that uncommon when it comes to European football, and often serve as a reminder to the underlying political and social issues that are hot topics across the continent. Now let's take a look at colonial legacies, social integration, and continuing racism. Now, the clear evidence on the pitch indicates that the wealthier European countries benefit from more foreign-born, ethnically diverse players. Beyond financial considerations, the presence of non-native players in the European national teams is often tied to historical and colonial legacies. Countries like France and the UK, with extensive colonial histories, have seen significant immigration from former colonies. This has led to more diverse populations and consequently, more diverse national teams. However, in many circumstances, the proportionality of immigrant ethnicity and race on the national team level is out of kilter to the overall nation. Take, for example, the English national team, which at some stages, just a few years ago, has been nearly 50% black or mixed race. Yet, the overall population of the country is less than 4% black. Similarly, over 40% of England's Premier League is black. Yet perhaps due to the lack of corresponding societal acceptance, we still see outbursts against black footballers like we saw in the aftermath of Euro 2020. Furthermore, black representation in soccer leadership positions is also extremely low. When I say leadership, I'm talking about executive, but moreover, the team managers or coaches. Very few of them have risen from being players in the black ranks into those leadership roles in the organizations of European soccer. Now, the crowds, they also tend to be mostly white and sometimes less than friendly to non-whites, leading some black parents to question whether they would ever bring their young child to a game. Now, going back a few years to 1998, when France won the World Cup, with a team made up of players with ethnic backgrounds from North Africa, West Africa, the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, Armenia, and the Basque Country. The phrase black, blanc, bleu, which is black, white, and Arab, was popularized as an adaptation of the traditional bleu, blanc, rouge, blue, white, red slogan, which represented the colors of the French flag. Now, while the French team was an in-group for France on the field, not all the French people were on board with the team. France's far-right Front National Party leader, Jean-Marie Le Pen, protested that the diverse ethnic roots that ran through the squad meant this was not truly a French team, and this was not at all a victory for the nation. Now, coincidentally, Monsieur Le Pen's daughter, Marine, is still active in French politics and is a 3-time presidential candidate. And, though perhaps she's not as extreme as her father, she does call for anti-immigration policies in France. Meanwhile, in Germany, where the national team features several players of African and Turkish descent, a very recent survey indicated that a significant portion of the population, some 20+%, prefers a whiter national team. Though this was still a minority view in the poll, it is clear that the underlying xenophobic sentiments are still present in Germany. This duality reflects broader societal debates about immigration, integration, and national identity. Now, all this leads me to makes it no wonder that Romelu Lukaku, who's a star on the Belgian national team, once said, and I'm quoting, "When things were going well, I was reading newspaper articles and they were calling me Romelu Lukaku, the Belgian striker. When things weren't going well, they were calling me Romelu Lukaku, the Belgian striker of Congolese descent. End quote. Now, in conclusion, as I wanted to take a look at the path forward, where does European soccer go from here? And the European tournament has stimulated a strong sense of national spirit among competing nations, as it always does, and thousands are traveling long distance to don the team's colors, the blue of Italy's Azzurri, Netherlands fans in their what I call highway worker orange color shirts, and the English, somewhat ironically based on the aforementioned examples of racism, in their white shirts. At the same time, such soccer gatherings can also put political and social tensions on display, with some fans behaving in a threatening manner towards fans of other nations, racist chants, and even some fans being critical of non-whites on their home country squads. The integration of diverse players into national teams will likely continue, nevertheless, as globalization and migration continues. However, soccer continues as a reflection of broader societal concerns about immigration, national identity and unity, economic disparity, and integrity. Just as in broader society, achieving true acceptance and integration will take time. While soccer can play a leading role in improving the broader societal conflicts, we are not there yet. For sure, soccer integration and acceptance may spur societal efforts to address inequalities and reduce deep-seated prejudices. However, change is unlikely to be swift, measured not in months or years, but in generations. And while I am hopeful for improvement, if I were a gambling man, I would bet that it will not be even 95% solved in the next 100 years. For now, I am left to focus on the positive sense of belonging, that psychological in-group, and my in-group, fellow Italians. Accordingly, I will be in front of the television tomorrow afternoon to watch them play Spain, wearing my Azzurri blue shirt, eating some homemade calabrese soppressata, and drinking a Peroni, and chanting Forza Italia. Well, that's the end of my little spiel and intro to the issue. And I bring along my producer, Rich,
Hey.
who, like me, also has some Italian roots
Yep.
and is also a soccer fan in Europe, probably a bigger one than I've been for longer. But Rich, welcome aboard. I hope you're doing well.
I'm
Tell me
doing well.
about your experiences or any thoughts of the things I touched on broadly. I know there's a lot of meat there, but
There's
anything
a lot there.
that really struck you about the discussion?
These are discussions that I've had with my sons. My sons and I are all big soccer fans, football fans. We're very fond. Premier League is our league of choice. We've watched some Bundesliga and we've watched some Madrid. Real Madrid when because we're big Ronaldo fans. Not that we don't like Messi, but we just kind of liked Ronaldo more. So we were very into the Madrid Barcelona for years, and we have a hard time watching the American version of soccer. Uh, in some ways, we actually watched Club America out of La Liga Mix. In some ways, because we have a friend who's a Mexican immigrant, and he's a Club America fan. So we tend to root for Club America just kind of because he's Mexican. So it's funny. And because of that, we watch World Cup, we watch Euros. We watched the women's game, and we've learned a lot about what you've talked about in your blog. And my one son is a sports management graduate. He works in the sports industry, so he's written a lot of papers about this, and he's done a lot of research on it as well. So we have this conversation quite often, and we've been to England, we've been to France. We've been to the Netherlands, we've been to Iceland. We see stadiums, we talk to people. And so we're right with you on a lot of this. The biggest thing for us, and the way I look at this, is that Europe had a population problem at the end of World War II, and so the governments of many of the European countries, before the European, before the EU started, they started to open up their borders, and the folks that they most likely encouraged to move into their countries were from their countries that they once, you know, were colonies, like you said in your write up. So, a lot of Belgian Congo, now it's just called the Congo again, immigrated into Belgium. And obviously that happened in France, from countries and all that. It happened in England. But they wanted these folks to move to their country so they could, bump up their taxes and things like that. But they really didn't want them to ever really consider themselves to be of their nation. Like, there are people that have been in France, and I've met people in France and talked to them. And they are still, they'll never be considered Parisian. And that one man, tears in his eyes, his children were, probably 10. This was 7, 8 years ago when I met this guy, and he's a hardworking guy, and he moved obviously there. And that is like a story that you hear in a lot of European countries. And that kind of is, but if you're good at a sport, it sounds like America, but if you're good at a sport, we look at you a little bit differently in those countries. So there is that hypocrisy, like, the French, there's all kinds of memes about, the French national team that Africa won, the African national team
Right.
won,
Well, like the
Euros,
phrase, right?
right.
Black, blue, and Arab.
Right. So it's interesting. It is. It's a problem for Europe. In terms of this population, there's always those things like you've probably seen them where, like, they want people to move to Italy, and you can have this house if you, if you agree to live there. They just announced something in the Italian government that people that live in the European Union who even have a grandparent that was an Italian citizen can apply for Italian citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
They just announced that, I think 2 weeks ago. I think I saw that. So it's a weird problem. And I think it does. There are things that we've watched. We know that there's racism in this country. Obviously, we don't deny that. But there's some weird, very specific types of racisms that exist in Europe that are very territorial within parts of Europe, like the Balkan states and,
Within the
former
same
Czech
country.
Republic, and within the same country. And
Yes.
I mean, we had an exchange student from Belgium when we were in high school, Raphael Arts, who lives in Antwerp and is a French speaker. He speaks French and Flemish. And, it's kind of like, there's parts of Belgium, like if you're the Flemish side versus the French speaking side, like they don't get along like at times. And it's just weird. It's so different. And when we were in France last year, we had one night layover in Paris. So we stayed near the train station so we could get to Charles de Gaulle's, and we didn't stay in the greatest neighborhood, but we found a cheap hotel. And it was clearly a very immigrant based neighborhood. We were definitely the minority in that neighborhood when we were floating around, and it was safe. We didn't feel any concerns like that, but it made me feel like that was what New York must have felt like in the 1920s or something, or like Gangs of New York, like in the 18 whatever, like with the movie Games of New York, like where it was, that neighborhood clearly was not taken care of the way a true Parisian neighborhood would have been taken care of.
Right.
And that's kind of my perception, having lived it and seen it and met people and talked to them. It's interesting.
Yeah, it sure is. There's a lot of, as staying with the broader kind of, issues and things like that. I mean, this, of course, as always, has a big crossover with all the immigration talk, and things of that nature. I mean, it's an ongoing, it's part of that game. It's part of that discussion, and it's just really, and it just keeps on going on and on. I mean, it's weird that it doesn't mute itself. In contrast, I do think it may soothe. There's still going to be a long time of ebb and flow with this. I think it might ease over time as far as these disparities and the distinctions to some extent. A couple of things that I always think of that you just can't get over is you can't get over the visual distinctions of a person who's black or or much darker than the native white populations of most of those countries.
Right.
And there's always a visual cue, and wasn't able to look up some of the any of the kind of psychological theory on this, but there's always that visual cue that automatically says this person is not of my group, regardless of how much they're embedded, which is kind of so. And when I pull that out to the bigger universe, or our bigger universe on Earth, it's the one thing about America that, I mean, not that we've been race perfect by any sense, but I think we're a lot further along. I don't know if it's in a period of
That's the
time
best way to we're ahead of the game, farther along in the game than they are, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
That's the best way to, you're not that we're great and we've done things significantly wrong at times, but it seems like it's easier if you look at the as a representative government. If you look at mayors and governors and councilmen and then congressmen and senators all the way up and presidents and all that stuff, we have a more diverse, our Supreme Court, all of our government looks more, our military looks more and more like the makeup of the population, where that's not the case in most of the countries you speak of, that we're talking about in Europe. That's not the case. It's very
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of, at least originally, and it's taken time, but it's also that the country is based more on ideas than on a strict nationality, even though the nationalities who were here longer have kind of been slow to
Well, it's kind of
allow
weird.
the other groups to come in, because like I mentioned, the Italian thing. I mean, some of them, they were, even as early 1900s, they were subject to a fair amount of abuses. Italians were coming in the South, and in New Orleans, Alabama, or in Louisiana, places like that. They referred to Sicilian immigrants kind of as the white Negroes.
The other dark meat was the term that was used quite often in the United States in that time period.
And there were laws like in Alabama.
There was a lynching of Italians.
Laws on the books that were against misogyny, which is marriage without, you cannot mixing of the races. I mean, these things. So I mean, and that's only 100 years ago.
Right.
So it's not like it was.
No, definitely. There were definitely laws in place for that. And there's still a weird, and I think that's a lot of weird where the hate for Catholics in this country comes from. Because the Catholics were traditionally from immigrants that were thought of as being lesser in society. They're here to build our buildings and dig our roads and, build the train systems and things like that, but not be in charge of everything. Like in our hometown of Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is still to this day a very, very diverse city, and there was a lot of trying to keep the Italians down within the city. Like there was an active effort in the 50s, previous to the 50s, like in probably the 30s, to kind of keep the schools. They had a lot of Italian immigrants in the city, and they were trying to keep them out of the public schools in some sense. That happened to my own grandfather and great uncle. Were told that they didn't dress appropriately because they were poor. They couldn't. And I think a lot of that generation, the Italians of that generation, they made their kids all go to college. So the generation of like our parents were like, most of them were the first ones to finish university, and with the understanding that they were going to run things. So now when you look at the city of Niagara Falls, like the mayor's Italian, the president of the hospital Italian, the school superintendent's Italian, the police chief's Italian. That would never have been the case like 80 years ago. Like they would have, never would have happened. And that's just an example of a group of immigrants that have risen up. And that's a million stories in America, where I think that's going to be much more difficult for that to happen in Europe. It's taking much longer for that to happen in Europe. It has happened. There are,
there's been a major breakthrough with like a lot of the Indian people of Indian descent in
Sure.
the UK.
Yeah.
Prime Minister is of Indian descent.
Yeah.
Now he may come from a fairly lofty group of
Well,
wealthy group of
I would
Indian
argue
people,
that's
but
probably why. Like, like
but
certain immigrant groups are looked differently. Like even in this country, we have a guy that
right.
was like, I don't want anybody coming from Central America. We want those classier immigrants coming from Europe. And one of this guy said, and we know who we're talking about. Like he
Well,
made that statement, and I'm like, well, okay.
well, the sun never set on the British Empire, but the British
Right.
Empire, when
Yeah.
they acknowledged people from some of the colonies, like in India and
Right.
Hong Kong, they gave them a passport, which was a British passport, but it was a British passport without the right to abode. In other words, they couldn't live in the UK proper,
Right.
necessarily based on that citizenship. But I think that at least that group of Indian migrants to has obviously made advances there. But I think they also have bigger numbers, and not only do they also some of them come from some wealthy backgrounds, and but I think they also have numbers. They have the advantage of having
It's an
having grown up in the
yeah.
colony, so that a lot of them for longer English has been more of a widely spoken language inside of places like India.
There's definitely a weird problem that they have in England in particular. Like even the Brexit is a weird um thing that is kind of like isolationism,
Yep,
where it's trying to get back to
like they're on an island.
trying to make England great again, kind of thing. Like
Yes,
it's kind of what it is.
more so.
Yeah, and not wanting to be part of the EU, and we don't want our tax dollars helping Greece and all those things, and that was sold really well, and but again, it's weird because it's a governmental thing that said it, because they were able to kind of tie into the populist feeling of that. But then there was also even like a corporate feeling of that. Like if you look at Premier League, like the Premier League has actively been going after the ownership of Manchester City for doing the same things that Man United did and Liverpool did for a lot of years. But the difference is those teams were traditionally owned by white guys who were from England. And
Right.
that was okay. All the years that Manchester United was owned by, they're owned by a American group now, but all the years that they were owned by like an English group, and it was fine. But as soon as Manchester City got good, but they were owned by a guy that's from the Emirates, like they have gone, and this constant barrage of lawsuits against those types of things. Like they willingly allowed Chelsea to be purchased by a Russian oligarch, and he ran the team for a lot of years. And then the invasion of Ukraine, they're like, well, you can't own the team anymore. Like you just went too far. But they were fine with him. They knew exactly what this guy was up to for all the years that that he owned. When he bought Chelsea, they approved the sale. But then all of a sudden it's just, well, no, we can't have that anymore. Like we got to get rid of you now. And it's like Chelsea's still paying for that, because how dare they have had a Russian oligarch as their owner? Like it's like, well, you guys approved the sale. Like it's a lot of weird, and then that stuff trickles down right to the populace. So it's not like, it's not just the people, it's the government too that has some weird, like just racism that's just kind of hanging around.
They have skin in the game too on these topics. There's
Yeah.
it's which is kind of weird, and all of this kind of it's just a weird thing that I think maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is that Americans feel like aside from the ones people maybe dislike Europeans or Europe because they're socialist on that kind of governmental approach concept, but I would probably think that they felt that Europeans were more progressive on some of these things, on some of these issues.
It's interesting that you said that, because that's one of the things my son Christian said before I left. He was like, it's funny because that's the weird thing. We've got the like universal health care in Europe.
Right.
But you're
it's
not really French.
Well, they're very socialist and populist when it comes to, but they're very they're very into the in group. From my description, the in group means that we can be social with you to some extent, at least for the time being, and we'll help you out in those circumstances. So we can be socialistic with that, which is like, I mean, Italy's classic for that, for that kind of
Europe
stuff.
still is as big as corporations are in Europe. Obviously, they have major corporations like we do, and they have, but their society is less based on commercialism and that's not the term that I guess our people are using for it nowadays, but like this, we have this thing in America where it's about the work and you gotta, and people, you're supposed to work 60 hours a week, and have this weird loyalty to your president, corporate overlord, and where that is less of a thing in Europe, where they're much more, the laws are written a little bit more to be supportive of a worker. They do try to stress the importance of, if you have a baby, the amount of maternity time you receive. And there are, having, more vacation time and they worked less hours and versus what's expected of the workers here in America. So there definitely is a more progressive and
Sharing mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They've a lot of countries over there are experimenting more with the 4-day work week, where you work 40 hours in 4 days versus 5. And schools are set up very differently too, in the way schools are run.
And there's some good and bad about all of that. As far as the
schools aren't perfect, right?
The race things and the immigration and bringing, So I mean, I mentioned before, like America, we're kind of ahead of the game on that. We weren't based on that, when we were formed, and we have more time in the game, as you indicated, and kind of to work through all the issues. But I mean, what's scary is kind of looking at places like, even though Russia has a lot of diversity out there, there's, the core is run by a fairly white group of people there. I mean, in China, it's fairly, again, there's a bunch of little subgroups they have there, but and these are places where people aren't migrating to.
And it's not even just
there's not really changing that dynamic. Those are kind of baked in. So I don't.
Some of those countries, even gender is still a thing. Like,
yes,
even gender is pretty far behind. Germany's had a female president, or prime minister, or whichever they use. I always forget which country uses what. But I mean, there still is. It's very difficult it's a chancellor. It's difficult to. It's difficult. There is more of even a glass ceiling in Europe than there. Again, I still think they're a little bit, like in some countries, there's still a lot more sexism.
I think some of Europe and the old countries, like in England, they're more class based. So there's built-in ceilings, even if you're, if you're not a different race or gender, you're still, there's still notions of that kind of club feeling. But I just wonder how, if the rest of the world progresses on this, which I hope they do, at least, because it's about being civil and getting along and being fair. I just wonder about places like China and Russia and those kind of, and even India. I mean, so you're talking about a big chunk of the world population, and it's like, are they really getting any more open to other people, other places, or are they kind of closed down to their own group? Just because they don't really have, as far as I know, significant migration to their countries. Nothing's changing the dynamic there.
China has a population problem because for so many years they didn't want people to have children, and they had to change all those things. But now they let the cat out of the bag, in the sense that people in China don't want to have 10 kids anymore. So China has a problem. And Christian and I were just talking about this, I think yesterday, about the population of Japan. Like there are very, the population growth is a negative, is a whatever they call it, a negative in Japan. Like, there are more old people than there are young people. Their population is not going up, their population is going down. And they are going to have that problem as well. It's funny because we went so far from the concept of how this is about the Euros, but it is about the Euros is just a reflection of everything that's going on in the world, like in
Right.
terms of it's just a true representation. And in sports and entertainment and television has always been a great reflection of how society is viewing things. And it's a European problem, but it's a problem in all the continents. It's a problem in like in so many places, like even in America, American soccer, you have the Lionel Messi's who get paid ridiculous amounts of money to play in the MLS, but then there's guys that are immigrants from Colombia, and it is structured in such a way that if you are an immigrant player in the MLS, they can actually pay you less.
Mm.
I have a friend who was at that level, who's from Colombia, who moved to the United States, came from a very wealthy family from Colombia, and was heavily recruited to play for like Columbus Crew and some other things, ended up getting injured. But we've talked extensively about this, is that the way they've structured that's how they kind of keep the teams profitable, by essentially not paying some of the immigrant players the same that they would play, an American, someone with or Canadian citizenship. So there's definitely, it's not like written down anywhere, but they're like, well, that's the contract we'll offer you. And they figure a lot of these folks will take it because they want to use it as a path to citizenship in the United States.
Yeah.
And, okay. It's really funny when you think about sports. It's always been a way for an immigrant populace to establish wealth in this country. When you think of like baseball in the 1920s, was a lot of Italians and Irish and, things, because they were the poor group that were kind of driven to play sports. And if you think about it in Europe and in like the poorest people in a lot of these countries are the ones that are trying to make it in these sports, because it is a ticket out of we obviously we talk about this in basketball, that basketball players, many of them grow up in poor, not all of them, but there is a desire. You come from a poor town and a poor city, and you get a scholarship and you get to make it to the NBA, and that's part of how we view the American dream, so to speak. And sports has always kind of been that. But there's that dark side of that too, the Jackie Robinson, what Jackie Robinson went through is kind of like what we see like Romeo Lukaku go through, or Conte,
Right.
who played for Chelsea. Like, it's sad. It's sad that we're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing was I was watching a baseball game a few weeks ago, and I think it was around when they had that Jackie Robinson Day, and they were talking about how there's less, there's less black players in Major League Baseball than there were 30 or 40 years ago. Many of the black players that come to the major leagues now are Dominican or from Latin America or things like that. But domestically, what's happened is it's kind of gotten like hockey, where it's become an expensive sport to play, and you have to have parents who have money to be able to afford to put these kids in these travel teams and in these camps. And like hockey, I mean, the reason I didn't play hockey pretty much when I was a kid was because it was expensive, right? You had to have all that equipment,
for
you had
sure.
to get the ice time and things like that. And so like,
Baseball has become
play.
very much like travel ball's the big one. Like, you're
Right.
not getting a scholarship because you played high school. Soccer in the United States, generally it's going to be because you're in a club travel team at a high level. You're playing a premier level club.
Right.
And they sell this, and people are this industry's making big bucks off of that. Basketball, it does have that, but basketball still seems to be the one. And I think a lot of it comes down to, when you think of the structure of basketball, it's not a big environment. It doesn't have ice. It's not a large team.
Not a lot of equipment.
It's not a lot of equipment. And but soccer is again, it's 22 guys on the pitch versus 10 on the court. And so basketball still seems to be the one where, but it's funny because because I think it was Silver that was the commissioner during the Michael Jordan era. He was very smart about how they started to build the game of the game of basketball in Europe. And now you see obviously a huge amount of immigrants transitioning, playing basketball in Europe. And a lot of those players like Luca and all these, these guys are coming,
it starts very young in
Yeah.
basketball from what I know. And
Yeah.
these kids now are being recruited into, a friend of
Yeah.
mine is, coaches for the local, one of those, they have these big high schools, right? They're high school things, and they recruit kids even from Europe onto and these are high.
Yeah, for sure. I think I lost your audio. Yeah, we're back. Sorry about that little glitch there. Yeah.
Yeah. So even if even like in basketball, but there's still opportunity, but the opportunity starts very young.
Yeah.
So because a lot of those kids are being recruited into programs, some of these high schools and things like that. I was mentioning that we grew up in Niagara Falls, and our public high schools actually were pretty successful in state basketball tournaments. But I think later on, I think even some of the kids who were successful ended up getting pulled out of Niagara Falls and taken into these large kind of high schools and stuff like that. That were almost like they were doing recruiting before you even got to high school.
And that speaks to some of the changes within, the way we view sports in the United States. Obviously, the pay to play is a big issue. We started with NCAA starting to pay athletes, that whole thing. And there's a lot of that. And it is like, it's because it's big business, and it's big business in Europe too. And even the national teams are big business. So, they're going to continue to do it's not going to get smaller. Parents, I coached a pretty good soccer team for a lot of years. We would always have, and we were pretty successful. So every year we'd have a kid try out for the team who really we were renting him for a year if we got him. Because he was planning to use us as a stepping stone to get to the next level club. Or whatever. And it was, the kids were always fine. It was never an issue with the kids. It was always the parent. It was always the father, the mother. I got to get my kid a college scholarship and all this stuff. And I used to laugh about that because I would just say, like, for soccer, I go, where do you think they're going that they're gonna, it's just kind of funny to me. I'm like, you'd be better off just spending your money on an SAT tutor and making sure the kid gets a really good SAT score, because he's going to get a better scholarship if his academics are better than if he's good at soccer. Basketball and football and other sports like that are a different animal. But like I joked, I would say, like, this is not a team where nobody's coming to watch us. You're not getting an offer to move up to, Premier League this, or, some club, academy for, again, I don't know, the Buffalo FC, if they had one, it's not happening around here. Like, we don't have that. It's just not a thing. And it's not a thing in our part of New York State, for sure. I mean, we play soccer for 4 months outside. Like, we're not going to, but it is like, I think these academy programs are, if I was an immigrant and I was, and I had an athletic child, I would probably try to get my kid in. If I was in France, I live in France, I would try to get my kid into a academy, because it's going to give him wealth. And many of these guys take care of their families for, like, generationally, will take care of their whole family. And even some of them will go choose to play in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years at the end of their career now, because they can make a busload of money, and they can take care of their families, like, not just their own family. They can take care of their brothers and their aunts and uncles and get them out of poor neighborhoods in whatever country, where they're living in. So they're going to use the system to their benefit, and good for them,
Yeah. So, I think we've successfully made the point and perhaps beat it to death that European soccer has a lot of impacts, and a lot of it looks like the way the world operates in a lot of ways too, and it tells us a lot about what's going on in Europe, I think, right now, and it also extrapolates pretty well to the entire world. So, with that being said, do we have to feel guilty about watching soccer, even though it has these dirty parts to it and it's not so unclean, or can we just freaking enjoy it?
I think like it's it's spread circuses, so they are. It is a distraction, so they want us to what? No, definitely. I mean, I watch it and I enjoy it and I spend money on it, and I would, when the World Cup comes to North America in a couple of years, I'm going to go buy tickets and I'm going to go. And if I go to Europe, I'm going to get tickets to a game. I'm going to go see it. I want to see, I love the sport, and I choose to, with all of these types of things. I believe that it creates exposure. I think Romelu Lukaku saying things. I think Antonio Conte coming out and saying things. I think Salah from Liverpool saying things. I think Ronaldo, all these guys, when they talk and they use their platform as a way of talking about, their experiences, I think that's a way for us to change the world a little bit. And maybe they're inspiring some other folks of similar, circumstances to, get an opportunity to be successful within their countries, and where it raises awareness. And, I think that, I think we are allowed to enjoy it. Understand that there is definitely, there's no perfect organizations out there. And we know for sure that UEFA is certainly not. Enjoy it. Go Italy. How do you feel about Italy's chances?
I don't expect them to get near the championship game. So, but I do. But in a short tournament, where there's not a lot of goals, if you can keep it close, anything that happened, I think for Italy, I think it would be a success if they can get out of the brackets and get maybe into a quarterfinal, and if they get that far, anything beyond that would be gravy for this team, based on they just don't have they have to play as a team. They don't have the pure out and out stars that the France, England, and even and actually the consummate team probably is are like Spain and Germany.
Spain and Germany every year are like, Spain obviously was very successful in international for several years in a row, back 2008 through 12, 14, somewhere in there. They seemed like they were winning everything. That generation's gone. Belgium, in my mind, screwed up the best generation they ever had. England now I would think, should be in a golden generation, and they have just the worst possible coach. I can't stand Southgate. I mean,
they have a history of choking and failing that would make you Buffalo Bills sports fans jealous.
It is like I watch watching England sometimes is like watching the Buffalo Bills. It's like, we should have won this. Like, what happened? Like, why? And it really comes down to like just really terrible decisions. And but it's funny, like it's hard for, like, because I'm Italian, but I don't have I'm not so connected to my Italian heritage that I have to root for Italy. I have a friend who, his parents moved here from Italy. They, so he is all in, where I'm not, I tend to just, like I said, I tend to root for England, but I just want to see good soccer. Like, so I just want to see a good tournament. I want to see some goals. I like some of the subtle changes they're trying to make with the offside rule, although they blew it. They really blew it against. I think Lukaku got screwed at least one time for sure. The game is evolving, and which I like. I think they're willing to embrace technology in the game. So I think that as long as they find a way to make the games entertaining, but yeah, go watch it, and it's a fun thing every 4 years. To see a team come together, because obviously the Olympics isn't a thing in soccer. It's just not. So Euros are obviously World Cup. Every 2 years you get to see these really amazing tournaments. So
Yeah.
Big deal.
Should be good.
Yeah.
Looking
Good
forward
luck.
to it. So
Yeah.
if you're not a soccer fan, maybe give it a shot.
Yeah.
I'm not pushing it or trying to sell it at all. But when I was very young, I had no interest in soccer whatsoever. I was American football, baseball, hockey, basketball. I've kind of faded a little bit on basketball, um, but um, but um, but soccer's taken a larger role, and it was no small part too when Italy played in the World Cup.
Yeah.
And the last time it was in the U.S. in 1994,
Right.
and lost on penalty kicks to Brazil, which still stings. But that was kind of for me. It was more the national identity thing that brought me to soccer than anything.
Interesting. Okay.
That's kind of where it started. So,
Yep.
so all these kind of tournaments and things like that are very important. They're very fun for me, and it's a good experience. I hope that like we talked about today, I hope that we can get to a better place with some of these other issues, and whoever wins this year's Euro 2024, we have none of the crap like what happened after 2020's event in England with let's let the winning be about the winning. Let's hope it happens clean without any controversy in terms of officiating or anything like that. And let's hope that the fans all go in peace and drink together instead of trying to hurt each other.
That's for sure.
Amen,
All right.
brother.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Rich. Thanks everybody for tuning in on June 19, 2024. Tune in soon for another session of They're All Lying to Us. Remember, again, you can find us on the web, www.lyingtous.com. You can also find our podcasts at Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Look for us under Lying to Us, or They're All Lying to Us on the podcast sites, and you will find this and other podcasts from our series. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Forza Italia.